Hello, everyone. My name is Leah Allen, and I am a second year teacher in Guilford County Schools, and I currently teach ninth through 12th graders. Um, all my classes are mixed grades. I have two beginners theater classes and one intermediate theater class. I teach at an inner city Title I school. It's a fairly new theater program. Before I got there, they didn't have theater for 3 years before that, and before that they hadn't produced a play in 8 years. So currently, until all, we have not produced a play in close to 11 years. So this will be my first play that I'm producing, and I hope to be able to do A Raisin in the Sun. So how has week one in this course helped me work towards my overall goal of teaching and directing high school students? First, I wanted to point out our reading materials for the course, the two textbooks that we were required to have, the Director's Vision textbook and the Bowman's textbook work really well together, I think, in examining like how to approach theater professionally as a director, and then also how to approach theater as a teacher director. And they work well together to complement, one like being more so about play analysis and plot and vision, and then the other being about like the hands-on tangible things that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis when you are a teacher director. So I thought that both of the textbooks worked together really well. They were great for this course. In the Director's Vision textbook, I had some quotes that stood out to me that got me thinking more. So the first one I'd like to point out is on page 3 of the Director's Vision. They talked about the first sentence that stood out to me was, all of us who direct, whether we are beginners or veterans, comma. So that really stood out to me because coming into this program, I was nervous about not having produced a school play before, so I didn't have like that experience to bring into it. I just only had my experience with working in some professional theater as an intern or in college. So as a teacher, I have not directed a play yet. So that quote really stood out to me about being a beginner or a veteran, because it lets us know that we're both in the same boat either way every time that we approach a play. In order to produce it, every time we approach a play, we start right back at the beginning. So in a way, we're beginners and veterans as we continuously produce plays. Whatever field of theater means knowing that you're always in the process of continuing your knowledge and continuing your education so that you constantly improve. Another quote that stood out to me was they compared theater to being its own form of science, and so that just got me to thinking on how the production process and the process that the director takes to get their vision is the same as kind of like the scientific experiment. And I enjoy reading about, hearing, and seeing the active form of theater and being compared to a perfect science experiment, because in a way that's the same way that people are dedicated to science, they are dedicated to theater. Another quote that stood out to me was, the theater is the direct descendant of fertility rites, war dances, and all the corporate ritual expressions by means of which our primitive ancestors, often wiser than we, sought to relate themselves to God or the gods, the great abstract forces which cannot be apprehended. So to me, this screamed theater is being compared to, ancestral storytelling. And that just stood out to me because, we learn in theater history classes that the playwrights often somehow bring their own life or ideas and concepts they have about the society and the world that they live into their playwriting. And in a way, that's ancestral storytelling, in the same way that something like religion comes into theater, and you think about how the Bible was a diary of what these people were experiencing at the time, and over time it's been dramatized and passed down, and it's once again an ancestral storytelling. So I love that theater was compared to that. So those were just a few quotes that stood out to me this week, and overall made me happier about taking this course because the supplemental material is actually really good and eye-opening, and it's very informative, relatable, and I was nervous about that being, relatable and things like that. So it's been a great way to softly ease into this course and my very first master's course. In the second textbook, chapter 2 is just great for me because, like I said, this is my first time producing a play at my high school, and so seeing the step-by-step process helped me to pre-plan in my head and get some thinking down on paper first before we paid for the rights for the show. Because, like I said, I know that we want to do a Raisin in the Sun, and my administration is in on it as well, and so we haven't paid for the rights yet, but I was able to read this chapter, take notes on this chapter, and then apply that to what I was experiencing in the real world. And so I'm just loving seeing how this mastery level course is already helping me to become a better teacher director in the real world as well. So in chapter 2, first thing that stood out to me, of course, was the key to directing a great school play is organization. So I was definitely worried about not being as organized coming into it because, like, once again, I've never done a full production in its whole. I've only done like small pieces or scenes out of a production. And so being organized is key to the success of our first play. And then I also enjoyed watching the breakdown of how the author talked about how they did a free adaptation of Shakespeare. So, of course, starting off with Shakespeare is a great concept because you don't have to pay. It's royalty free because, you know, the great old Shakespeare is not here anymore. So starting off with that is very smart, and because you don't have to pay for the rights up front, so it's an easier way for your program to get started without having to worry about paying royalties at first. And then doing a smaller production like The Little Shop of Horrors, which is in grand scheme of things, it's a musical, and it is bigger than A Midsummer Night's Dream, and however you choose to do it, but that helped the author to generate more income for years ahead, and that just was really a great process for me, being that my program has no budget, so we are solely focusing on fundraising to fund the show. So knowing shows that I could start with in the future to help generate for the next year, and so that way I'm constantly thinking ahead. That was great. And lastly, another quote that stood out to me was that a car wash or a bake sale may prove to be a fine bonding experience for your cast and crew, though they tend to yield small results. Although this quote was about, you know, fundraising and how using your cast and crew helps to promote fundraisers and the bonding experience for them, what stood out to me was the bonding experience, because it's telling me like, oh, hey, as you're planning this, don't forget to create opportunities outside of the theater and outside of rehearsal to get your cast and your crew to bond, because ultimately the crew and the cast need to have good chemistry in order for the show to be successful. So hey, you know, don't forget that part too. So I enjoyed reading our supplemental materials and summarizing them to give a better overall understanding. So last but not least was the considering an outside director. I never considered an outside director, and which is great because my school community has a huge alumni, as it is like a historically black high school, so it has a huge alumni like that helps with fundraising, helps contribute and things like that. So, you know, I didn't consider an outside director because they're there for different aspects, but it would be great to have an outside director, being that I haven't produced a high school play on my own yet. So having somebody else to like shadow for that experience was a great point that the text made, and it got me thinking once again in different ways of how I can make this process more seamless and easier. And then even though I had like maybe thought like, oh, you know, we could bring an outside person before, I never considered it as far as to how we would compensate that person for their time and that experience, because it would ultimately be jumpstarting this program. It was great to see that breakdown included in the text, because it was once again real, like, tangible evidence that you could use and directly apply, and easy to explain to your administration so that you get them on your side and jumpstarting the program. That's all for this week's, folks. I've enjoyed reading, I've enjoyed commenting, I've enjoyed reading about your experiences and how I could work them in with my experiences. See you next week.